Sarah, America's youngest self-made tech CEO, could command thousands with a single email, but there was one voice she could never reach, her 8-year-old daughter Lily, silent since the day her father died. 8 years. 8 years of doctors, therapies, retreats, and silence. And then, on a random Tuesday afternoon at a quiet playground, everything changed. Lily sat alone on a swing, still as a statue, until a single dad and his joyful little boy walked into her orbit. Sarah braced herself for another failed attempt at connection. But what happened next was something even Sarah's billions could never buy. A miracle, triggered not by medicine, not by therapy, not by experts, but by a stranger with a gentle smile, a noisy little boy, and a kind of patience she had never seen before. To truly understand Sarah, you have to understand the nature of her power. On any given Tuesday morning, she could walk into a boardroom filled with intimidating men in gray suits and, with quiet, surgical precision, dismantle a flawed business model in under 5 minutes. Her mind was a finely tuned instrument, seeing patterns and solutions where others saw only intractable chaos. She managed a workforce of 10,000 and billion-dollar budgets with an unnerving, almost supernatural calm. She was respected, feared, and admired for her unparalleled ability to solve the unsolvable. Problems were simply puzzles, and Sarah had never met a puzzle she couldn't crack. But when she came home, that formidable power dissolved at the grand, imposing front door. The house, an architectural marvel designed for hosting huge galas, was always suffocatingly silent. The sharp click of her expensive heels on the polished marble floors felt like an intrusion, a profane noise in a sacred space of quiet. And at the heart of this silent kingdom was Lily. Lily, with her mother's striking blue eyes and a solemn, ethereal grace that was heartbreaking to behold. She was a beautiful, healthy, brilliant child in every measurable way but one. She didn't speak, not a single word, not a whisper, not since she was 3 years old. Not long after her father, Sarah's beloved husband, had been taken from them in a sudden, tragic car accident. The shock, the legion of doctors had guessed, had flicked a switch deep within her young mind, locking her voice away in a vault where no one, not even her mother, could find it. Their life together was a meticulously structured routine of silent love. Sarah would read to Lily for hours, her own voice filling the vast cathedral-like living room, bouncing off the minimalist furniture and unadorned walls. They would paint together for entire afternoons, Lily creating vibrant, expressive worlds on canvas that screamed with the very emotions she could not voice. She painted furious crimson storms and serene, endless blue skies, canvases that spoke volumes. Sarah would brush her daughter's long, dark hair, 100 strokes every night, telling her about her day, about the tall buildings and the complex deals, always pausing, always unconsciously, leaving a space for a response that never, ever came. It was a one-sided conversation that had stretched on for 2,920 excruciating days. The world of the wealthy had offered its most expensive solutions. There was a doctor in Switzerland with a sterile white clinic and a 2-year waiting list that promised a revolutionary neurological approach. There was a holistic retreat in Bali where soft-spoken gurus promised to realign Lily's spiritual energy with chanting and ancient herbs. There were therapists who used puppets, sand trays, art, music, and even gentle, patient horses. Through it all, Lily remained a silent, passive spectator in her own recovery, her blue eyes watching everything with a deep, unsettling wisdom. Sarah's fortune, an entity so powerful it could acquire competing corporations and influence government policy, was utterly, pathetically useless against the quiet, unyielding anxiety of one small child. The decision to go to the local park that afternoon was born from a new and terrifying feeling for Sarah: surrender. She was done. She was tired of trying to fix her daughter as if she were a flawed line of code. She had called her assistant that morning and, in a voice devoid of its usual authority, canceled the appointment with the latest high-priced specialist from Boston. She told the nanny to take the rest of the week off. For just one afternoon, she wanted to stop being a CEO and just be a mother, and she wanted Lily to just be a child, even a silent one. She drove them herself in a simple, anonymous SUV, not the chauffeured black sedan, and they walked into the chaotic, vibrant, messy world of the local park. Sarah felt completely vulnerable, stripped of the armor of her wealth and status. She sat on a worn wooden bench, her designer handbag looking absurdly out of place, and braced herself for the inevitable stares and whispered questions from the other parents. That's when she saw them, a small island of calm in the sea of playground chaos. The man, who she'd later know as Alex, was leaning against a sprawling oak tree, watching his own son with an expression of easygoing contentment. He wasn't scrolling on his phone, wasn't distracted by a conversation. He was just present. His jeans were faded, his t-shirt was well worn, and the smile lines around his eyes ran deep, telling a story of genuine laughter. His son, a whirlwind of boundless energy named Leo, was narrating a dramatic, high-stakes battle between two battered action figures in the sandbox, complete with his own sound effects. Sarah watched, a knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach, as Leo, looking for a new battlefield, grabbed his toys and toddled over toward the swing set where Lily sat in her quiet, motionless orbit. Instantly, Sarah's defenses shot up. She began rehearsing her polite but firm dismissal, the one she used to shut down the usual intrusive question, "Why doesn't she talk?" But the question never came. Leo stopped a few feet from Lily, his head cocked. He looked at her, then at his action figure. "This is Captain Thunder," he announced to the air, his voice full of childish importance. "He needs a high place to see the bad guys." He glanced at the empty swing next to Lily's. He didn't ask her to move. He didn't ask her anything. He simply climbed onto the swing beside her, a little grunt of effort escaping him, and held Captain Thunder up high. "Now I can see everything," he declared to his imaginary audience. Lily, who usually retreated further into herself around other children, stopped her gentle, barely there rocking. Her head turned just slightly, her curious eyes following the journey of the plastic superhero. She watched for a full, uninterrupted minute as Leo made explosion sounds and flew the toy in dramatic loops. There was no pressure, no expectation, no demand for interaction. It was just a shared space. After a few moments, Alex ambled over. He didn't approach Lily directly, but stood near his son, giving him space. He caught Sarah's eye and gave her a small, genuine nod. It wasn't pity, a look she despised. It was just acknowledgement. "They live in their own worlds, don't they?" he said, his voice soft and warm, carrying easily over the playground noise. Sarah was so taken aback by the simple, empathetic statement that she almost didn't respond. "Sometimes," she managed to reply, her voice coming out tighter than she intended. "I'm Alex, and that's my little tornado, Leo," he said with a low chuckle that made his eyes crinkle even more. "Sarah, and Lily," she responded automatically, the words feeling foreign in this context. Alex knelt near his son, placing a gentle hand on his back. "All right, Captain Thunder, mission accomplished. Time to give the swings to someone else who might be waiting." He then looked in Lily's general direction, but not directly at her, a subtle but important distinction. "It's a good day for swinging," he said to no one in particular. "The wind feels nice." And that was it. They moved on. He gathered Leo, who was now chattering about needing a snack, and they left. No probing questions, no unsolicited advice, no awkward attempts to force a conversation that wasn't there. As they walked away, Leo turned and gave a little, enthusiastic wave, not specifically at Lily, but just in her general direction. For the first time in years, Sarah saw Lily's hand twitch at her side, the ghost of a reciprocal wave that didn't quite form. Her heart, which she thought had become numb, hammered against her ribs. That tiny, aborted gesture felt like more progress than she had seen in years of expensive therapy. It was a fissure in the wall of silence. A strange, unfamiliar pull brought them back to the same park 2 days later. Sarah told herself it was for Lily, that the change of scenery was good for her, but a deeper, more honest part of her was curious about the man who had expected nothing and, in doing so, had received more from her daughter than anyone. And they were there again. Alex and Leo. It felt less like a coincidence and more like fate. This time, Leo had brought a bucket of brightly colored sidewalk chalk and was busy drawing a sprawling, imaginary city on the dark pavement. Sarah settled on their usual bench with Lily, pretending to be absorbed in an email on her phone, but watching every single move. Leo drew a wobbly-looking dog with 3 legs. "This is Sparky," he announced to his world. He then looked over at Lily, who was watching him with an undisguised, intense curiosity. He picked up a piece of vibrant yellow chalk, walked over toward the bench, and held it out. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Her maternal instinct screamed at her to intervene, to manage the situation. But Alex, who was watching from a short distance away, gave her a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of his head. He trusted his son. So Sarah, for once, did nothing. Leo didn't ask the typical question, "Do you want to draw?" He just said, "Sparky needs a son," and placed a piece of chalk on the ground near Lily's foot before turning and going right back to his intricate cityscape. He had offered an invitation without demanding an answer. Sarah held her breath. The yellow chalk was a beacon on the gray pavement, a silent question. For 5 long, agonizing minutes, Lily didn't move. She just stared at it. Sarah's entire being vibrated with the urge to encourage her, to say, "Go on, sweetie, draw with him, it's okay." But the memory of Alex's gentle, no-pressure approach held her back. It was the hardest thing she had ever done, but she did what he had done. She stayed quiet. She just waited. And then, it happened. Slowly, so slowly, as if moving through water, Lily slid off the bench. She knelt on the pavement, her small hands trembling almost uncontrollably, and picked up the yellow chalk. She didn't draw a sun. Instead, a few feet away from Leo's city, she drew a small, simple flower. A single yellow tulip. It was shaky and imperfect, the petals slightly lopsided, but it was there. It was a response, a communication, a word in the language of color. Leo looked over, and his face broke into a huge grin. "Wow, a flower for Sparky to sniff," he exclaimed, and immediately drew a wobbly path connecting his city to her flower, integrating her world into his. From across the pavement, Alex caught Sarah's gaze and smiled, a deep, knowing look that acknowledged the immense weight of the moment without shattering its fragile magic. When he and Sarah spoke later, as the kids continued their silent, parallel play, she found herself opening up in a way she never did. She told him about Lily's shyness, the sanitized word she used for the terrifying silence. Alex listened with a patience she hadn't known existed. He didn't interrupt, didn't offer quick fixes. He just listened. He told her he was a former firefighter, forced into early retirement by a severe leg injury sustained in a warehouse fire. His wife, he explained with a sad but accepting shrug, hadn't signed up for the quiet life of recovery and had left not long after. It was just him and Leo now, figuring it out day by day. "Kids have their own timeline," he said softly, his gaze resting on Lily. "The whole world is always rushing them, telling them to hurry up, to be faster, to be better. Sometimes I think all they really need is someone who's willing to be slow with them, to just sit in the quiet for a minute and wait." His words hit Sarah with the force of a physical blow. Rushing, fixing, solving, accelerating. That was her entire identity. She'd been trying to manage Lily's mutism like a hostile corporate takeover, throwing resources and experts at it, expecting a predictable result. Alex, with his worn-out genes and firefighter's pension, understood something fundamental that she, with all her world-renowned genius, had missed completely. It wasn't a problem to be solved. It was a person to be loved, patiently, and without condition. The park became their sanctuary. 3, sometimes 4 times a week, Sarah would find an excuse to leave work early, her multi-million-dollar meetings seeming less and less important. Each visit brought a tiny, miraculous breakthrough. One day, Alex brought a picture book with vivid illustrations of jungle animals. He didn't offer it to Lily, but simply sat on the grass and started reading aloud to Leo. After several minutes of watching from her bench, Lily quietly slipped off and came to sit a few feet away, just close enough to see the pictures of the monkeys and tigers. Another afternoon, Leo was trying to fly a small, cheap kite and getting increasingly frustrated as it repeatedly nosedived into the grass. Sarah tensed, expecting a tantrum that would shatter the peace. But Alex knelt down beside his son. "It's frustrating, isn't it, buddy?" he said calmly, validating the feeling. "Looks like the wind doesn't want to play today. That's okay. We can't force it. How about we make it a running kite instead?" he demonstrated, taking the string and running across the field, letting the kite drag and bounce hilariously behind them, turning a moment of failure into a joyful, ridiculous new game. Lily watched the entire exchange, her eyes wide with concentration. Sarah realized she was watching a masterclass in emotional intelligence. Alex didn't fix the problem of the wind. He helped his son manage the feeling of frustration. Sarah thought of all the times she'd tried to fix Lily's frustrations with a new, expensive toy or an immediate distraction. Alex sat in the feeling with his son and showed him how to move through it. It was a profound revelation. Slowly, Sarah started to change. She began leaving her phone in the car. One sunny afternoon, inspired by Alex, she simply lay on the grass and watched the clouds drift by. After a few silent moments, a small body lay down beside her. It was Lily. They didn't speak. They just lay there, side by side, watching the clouds morph from dragons to ships to faces. It was the most deeply connected Sarah had felt to her daughter in years. With a mix of hope and trepidation, she cautiously invited Alex and Leo to her imposing mansion for dinner. Her heart pounded as they approached the towering glass and steel structure. She was terrified the sterile silence of her home would undo all their hard-won progress. "You live in a castle!" Leo yelled as they stepped inside, his voice echoing magnificently in the cavernous foyer. Sarah flinched instinctively at the loud noise, but Alex just laughed. "Inside voice, buddy," he reminded him gently, without any real heat. Leo wasn't intimidated by the opulence. He saw a giant unexplored playground. He discovered the echo and spent 5 minutes shouting silly words. He slid in his socks across the polished marble floors. He declared that a priceless piece of abstract art was a big blue monster. He single-handedly filled the oppressive, heavy silence with life. Lily, meanwhile, was a watchful shadow, observing him from doorways, a tiny, curious ghost in her own home. Then, Leo found Lily's playroom, a space crammed with every expensive, educational, untouched toy a child could ever want. He ignored them all and went straight for a simple, dusty set of wooden blocks. He started building a tower. And a big one here, and this one here. The tower grew taller, more precarious. He reached for another block just out of his reach on a low shelf. Lily stood in the doorway, watching. Her gaze flickered between the block and Leo's struggle. She took one hesitant step into the room, then another. She walked silently over to the shelf, picked up the exact block Leo was reaching for, and placed it gently in his outstretched hand. Leo beamed. "Thanks," he said, and without missing a beat, he placed the block on the very top. The tower immediately swayed and crashed down in a glorious, clattering cascade of wood. For a split second, there was silence. Sarah held her breath, bracing for disappointment. Then Leo burst into peals of delighted giggles. And as Sarah watched, her world shifting on its axis, a tiny, almost imperceptible smile touched Lily's lips. The first genuine smile Sarah had seen in what felt like a lifetime. The following week, they were all back at the park. It had become their ritual, their shared space. Sarah and Alex sat on a bench, talking with a newfound ease that felt both thrilling and deeply comforting. They spoke of their pasts, their struggles, their hopes for their children. For the first time in her adult life, Sarah found herself admitting her deepest fears, voicing her profound feelings of failure as a mother. Alex didn't offer solutions or platitudes, he just listened. In his quiet, steady gaze, she felt truly seen, not as a powerhouse CEO, but as a scared, vulnerable mother. And in that, she felt a strange sense of relief. Leo and Lily were playing near a paved bike path that wound through the park. Leo was chasing a bright red ball with unrestrained glee, his laughter carrying on the breeze. Lily was a few yards away, methodically collecting a bouquet of dandelions. The scene was idyllic, a perfect picture of their new, fragile normal. The moment unfolded in horrifying slow motion. Leo, in a burst of excitement, kicked the ball too hard. It bounced once and rolled directly onto the bike path. Just as any child would, he sprinted after it, his eyes locked on the prize, oblivious to anything else. At that exact instant, a cyclist, head down in an aerodynamic tuck and pedaling hard for speed, was bearing down on that very spot. Sarah saw it. Alex saw it. They were both too far away to intervene. A cry of pure terror caught in Sarah's throat. Alex was already on his feet, his voice a desperate roar. "Leo, stop!" But the wind seemed to swallow the words. Time seemed to stretch and warp. Sarah's mind, the one that could process 1,000 data points in a second and chart a course through financial chaos, went completely, utterly blank. She was paralyzed, a spectator to her worst nightmare. But someone was closer. Lily stood frozen for a single, eternal heartbeat, her small hands full of yellow dandelions. She saw the red ball. She saw Leo running, his small legs pumping. She saw the terrifying, fast-moving shape of the cyclist. Her blue eyes went wide with a terror that dwarfed her own, and in that instant, a raw, primal instinct, buried for 8 years under a mountain of anxiety and trauma, finally erupted. "Leo!" The voice was raspy, unused, and shockingly loud. It was a desperate, piercing cry. The words sliced through the park's gentle hum, sharp and clear as a bell. The cyclist, startled by the sudden shout, swerved hard, his bike skidding on the asphalt. Leo, hearing his name shouted in that unfamiliar, urgent voice, stopped dead in his tracks, just inches from the edge of the path. The cyclist shouted something angry and incomprehensible and rode on, utterly oblivious to the miracle that had just taken place. A profound, ringing silence descended on the scene. Leo looked around, his face a mask of confusion. Alex stood frozen, his face pale with residual fear and dawning disbelief. And Sarah didn't move. She couldn't. Her brain was still trying to process the sound. That voice. It was a memory, an echo from another life, the voice of her little girl. She looked at her daughter. Lily was standing perfectly still, the dandelions scattered at her feet. Her small chest was heaving with ragged breaths, her eyes wide with shock at her own explosive sound. Then, as the reality of what she had done crashed down on her, tears began to well up, her face crumpling in fear of the very voice she had just reclaimed. It was the sight of Lily's own fear that finally broke Sarah's paralysis. The CEO was gone. The strategist was gone. In her place was just a mother, but a different one. The old Sarah would have rushed forward, overwhelming Lily with frantic questions and crushing hugs, making the moment about her own relief. The new Sarah, the one who had learned from Alex's quiet patience, did something else entirely. She walked over slowly, her own tears streaming silently down her face, and knelt in the grass in front of her daughter. She didn't hug her, not yet. She just looked her in the eyes, her expression full of a love so immense, so proud, it was almost tangible. "Thank you, Lily," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "You were so brave. You saved him." Lily looked at her mother, at the tears of joy and not of sorrow, and her own tears spilled over. She didn't speak again, but as Sarah gently, finally, wrapped her arms around her, Lily didn't stiffen or pull away as she usually did. For the first time in memory, she leaned into her mother's embrace and held on tight, her small hands gripping the back of Sarah's shirt. Alex reached them a moment later and scooped up a still confused Leo, holding him close and murmuring reassurances. He looked at Sarah and Lily, locked in their embrace, a silent tableau of love and relief, and he said nothing. He didn't have to. In that single, shared, terrifying moment, the four of them had become something more. In the crucible of fear and love, they had become a family. That one word was not a magic cure. Lily didn't suddenly become a chatterbox. The path forward was slow and deliberate, much like Lily herself. But the lock on the cage had been broken. The first new words came a week later, whispered to Leo as they were building a block tower on the mansion's marble floor. "Blue one." A few days after that, a whispered question for Alex as he showed her a fuzzy caterpillar on a leaf in the garden. "Is he sleeping?" Her voice, when it finally, truly came to Sarah, was the last to arrive and by far the most precious. It happened one night as Sarah was tucking her into bed in her quiet, pristine room. She'd just finished reading a story, and as she leaned in to kiss Lily's forehead, a tiny, hesitant voice whispered into the stillness, "Read it again?" Sarah's heart stopped, then restarted with a jolt of pure, unadulterated joy. She didn't cry, she just smiled, a real, bone-deep smile that reached every corner of her being. "Of course, sweetheart," she said, her voice steady and warm, 1,000 times. The mansion was no longer silent. It was filled with Leo's boisterous laughter, Alex's calm voice, and the slow, steady, beautiful blossoming of Lily's. Sarah's life transformed. She didn't sell her company, but she delegated with a ruthlessness she had once reserved for acquisitions. She rediscovered the lost art of the weekend. She learned that the most valuable asset she possessed wasn't her stock portfolio, but her time. Alex never asked for anything, but Sarah, seeing a new problem she finally knew how to solve, set up a multi-million-dollar foundation for the families of injured and fallen first responders, with him at the helm. It wasn't charity, it was a partnership. Theirs was not a fairy tale of a rich woman saving a poor man. It was a story of two people with different, equally valuable kinds of wealth, one of money and one of heart, coming together to build something truly priceless. Sarah, the woman who could command the world, learned that the most profound power lies not in commanding, but in listening. She learned that a child's silence isn't an absence of words, but a presence of fear, and fear can't be forced or bought away. It can only be dissolved with patience, acceptance, and the quiet, unwavering promise that it's okay to take your time. She discovered that the greatest empires aren't built of glass and steel, but of soft voices, shared laughter, and the courage to simply wait for a flower to bloom in its own time. And in the end, the CEO realized true wealth isn't measured by the numbers in your bank account, but by the love you are brave enough to receive. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to our channel for more tales that remind us of the power of human connection. And share this video with someone who needs to know that the most beautiful miracles often grow in the quietest of places.